Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1994 vampire film, Interview with the Vampire. Now, Interview with the Vampire is one of those films that I'd honestly seen previously, but it had been like at least a couple decades since I saw it last. So, the most recent viewing of this film was like watching it with fresh eyes. And it really blew me away. I'm not exaggerating. I thought this film was astonishingly good. I thought this film had some absolutely lavish production design and art direction. I thought the film had some absolutely spectacular direction by Neil Jordan. I thought the cinematography was splendid. I thought all of the other technical aspects of this movie were terrific. I thought it had a solid script. I thought the performances were first rate. Honestly, I got nothing but praise for this movie for the most part, except for a few minor quibbles. I thought this film was an absolute masterwork and definitely one of my favorite vampire movies. Now, before I continue to gush about Interview with the Vampire, I want to give a special shout out once again to Brock for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, Interview with the Vampire is based on a book called, I believe, Interview with the Vampire. It's a part of this series called The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. Now, I've never read the book series, so I don't really know how good of an adaptation this is of the source material. I do know that Anne Rice was really taken aback by the casting of Tom Cruise as Lestat. When Tom Cruise was announced to be Lestat for this film, she was absolutely beside herself. And she wasn't the only one. Like a lot of these other Anne Rice uh, Interview with the Vampire, Vampire Chronicles fans, they were up in arms. They did not like this casting choice at all. But just like a lot of other instances of supposedly horrible, bad casting choices where people freaked out about things before they even saw the movie, it didn't turn out to be as bad as they had feared. And in this instance, it turned out to be the total opposite. Tom Cruise was absolutely amazing in the role. It was definitely one of his best performances of the time, and I think it's still one of his best roles to this day. I thought he was perfect to play Lestat, especially the vision or the version of Lestat that was present in this film. Because Tom Cruise, out of a lot of actors in Hollywood, he really is one of the few where you could really see him projecting some sort of regal nobility. Like he had that aura about him. So I think it was inspired casting, and the results speak for themselves. Like Tom Cruise was an absolute showstopper as Lestat. And it was a very different kind of role for Tom. He was able to play outside of his comfort zone. He was able to be, the pretty leading man that a lot of people were used to when it comes to his filmography at the time, but he was also able to be evil. He was also able to be sociopathic and cunning and conniving, and it really did showcase his range as an actor. It showed you that he could play a charismatic, charming vampire uh, just as well as he could play Maverick or a race car driver or any of these other things that he was known for as a actor. So yeah, it's one of those things that I definitely, when I think about Anne Rice and the novel, I immediately think of just how upset she was when it comes to the casting of Tom Cruise. And then after she saw the film, she was one of the first to come out and say, I was wrong. Like, Tom was great. I can't even think of anyone else who would have been better in the role. So, just like I can't think of anyone else that would have done a better job directing this film than Neil Jordan. Now, Neil Jordan, prior to this, of course, he had done films like The Crying Game, and I think that was really the film that really put him on the map. I do remember him from The Company of Wolves and from a film called High Spirits from 1988, which is a fantasy comedy that had, I believe, yeah, Steve Guttenberg was in it along with Daryl Hannah. But really, The Crying Game is the film that really put him on the map in Hollywood. And I think that's a big reason why he got this directing job. And I think this is his masterpiece. I think this is his finest work. I mean, he did some good work after this, like In Dreams, but I honestly feel that his peak, his best work as a director was An Interview with a Vampire. This is an incredible film when it comes to the direction. The way that he just wonderfully crafts his sequences visually is just a sight to behold. It really is. This is a great looking movie. It's just as lavish visually in terms of its size and its scope and its presentation as the art direction or the costume design. It's a very gothic film at times, but it's also a film that has a very almost sort of contemporary, at least of the time, visual style. It doesn't come across as stale visually or something that is stuck in the past. It's a film that uses a lot of various different techniques when it comes to the direction in terms of angles and pans and zooms and all these different aspects of directing, and everything is just used in a way that is just very pinpoint, very accurate, and just so wonderfully visually delicious that you just can't help but sink your teeth into pretty much every scene in the film because it's just so well shot and so well done. Um, I love the way this film looks. I think it has some of the best direction that any vampire movie has, or any film period. Like, this is just a really great looking film with some really uh, top flight, terrific direction by Neil Jordan, and the script by Anne Rice, which is based on her novel, is also really great stuff. I think it definitely did help that you had Anne Rice involved, because then it was able to really capture the spirit of whatever the source material was intended to have in a way that didn't come across forced or anything like that, because you had the same author involved trying to bring the story to life on the screen. Even though she's credited as the only screenwriter, I kind of don't necessarily buy that that's the case. This seems like a kind of film where there was some rewrites, there were some things that happened behind the scenes where you have some guys or gals who were uncredited, because I kind of find it hard to believe that Anne Rice, who didn't really have a whole lot of experience writing films, was just this good at writing movies right off the bat. But I mean, I could be 100% mistaken, but it's just one of those things where, just from what I saw with this film and how it tends to kind of differ from what I've read when it comes to the source material, and I'm not saying that I've read the novel, I'm just saying I've read people's thoughts on this film in comparison to the novel. And from those pieces, it seems like this does take a lot of departures at times creatively. So it seems like one of those things where either Anne Rice made those changes to please the studio, or she decided to make those changes herself. I really don't know, but it just does seem like one of those scripts where one person is credited, but there probably was a few other voices in there when it comes to the writing. Whatever the case may be, it's a great script. It really is. I think it does a really amazing job just hooking you right from the beginning with the interview with the reporter Daniel Malloy, who's interviewing Lewis or Louis. He's interviewing Louis, and Louis telling him his life story. And it doesn't really take that long for it to start getting into the vampire stuff. And I just the way that Louis becomes a vampire was just so sudden and so really intriguing in terms of the way that the sequence is blocked and set up, that it really does it just really grabs you by the throat. And that's exactly what happens. Louis gets grabbed by the throat by Lestat and gets carried up into the air, and then Lestat fights him and then leaves him for dead essentially, and then gives him a choice. Like, do you want to live forever? Do you want to be young and beautiful for the rest of your life, or do you want to die? I'm gonna give you that choice because my creator, my maker, never gave me that. And I really like the way that the dynamic is written between Louis and Lestat. It's antagonistic, but in a way that's not off-putting. You see, the two don't always necessarily get along, but the way that they handle certain situations, the way that they react to things is so different from one another that it makes for some really interesting banter and setups for sequences involving these two. Where Louis, he doesn't want to drink human blood. He's trying to do everything that he can to escape that. So he's eating rats and he's eating all these other things. And of course, Lestat, he's this longtime veteran vampire who is just completely puzzled by why Louis would be acting the way that he is, why Louis would rather be eating rats and poodles and all this other stuff, and instead of rich socialite women. And I just think it's a really good contrast between those two characters. And the Stot's a great villain. He's a great antagonist. You can see why he's able to manipulate and draw Louis in to this life of vampirism and essentially put him in his own sort of trance, so to speak. But then you can also see why Louis is trying to push away, trying to pull away from Lestat. And then what Lestat does to keep him uh, in his control is so depraved. He takes advantage of Louis' sympathy for this young girl who is dying of the plague. And she's also dying because Louis actually feasted on her. He succumbed to his inner demon and bit her on the neck. And so Lestat decides, I'm going to take advantage of that and I'm going to turn Claudia into a vampire. So now you can have a daughter, you can have somebody that you can care for and take care of, and we can be a family. And that was just so depraved and twisted and I loved it. I thought it was just brilliant to take that kind of uh dynamic and to just turn it into something that was just so tortured and disturbing. Normally it's like, oh, we adopted a kid. That's awesome. That's a great thing. But here it's like it's just flipped completely upside down on its head. And that leads to some of the most genuinely compelling aspects of this script involving Claudia as she continues to learn from Lestat, and she's a much more vicious, much more impulsive vampire than Louis. And just to see how her character grows throughout the decades, how she starts off like, normal girl her age would, uh, being into dolls and dresses and all this other stuff, and not really thinking about adult things or what it's like to grow up. But then as the years just continue to go by, she then longs for having the body of an adult woman. She longs for having that kind of connection that only an adult female could have with an adult male. She longs for these things. And then she starts to find out and realize the truth behind her vampirism. And that causes her to be upset and angry at Lestat and also upset at Louis. And it just furthers the drama. And this is where Interview with the Vampire is really at its strongest, and is when you have these different sort of dynamics that are swirling around inside this story. The stuff with the interview with the reporter is fine too, and then that's a good setup and structure for the beats that the film decides to carry when it comes to its story. But really, when it comes to the dynamics, that's really where the film uh, gets the most life and really does have the best impact is when in those kind of sequences. It kind of goes away from that a little bit when Lestat winds up being taken out of the picture. I really thought the way that he was taken out initially was very unique. I don't remember ever seeing a vampire film showcasing this, where he gets tricked and he's drinking the blood of a dead person, and it's bad blood. So that makes him weak and frail, not necessarily frail, but it makes him very vulnerable. So then you can cut his throat and then not necessarily kill him, because you find out later that it doesn't matter what you do. He's not going to die, which I thought that was also a nice little twist on things too when it comes to the vampire lore that you typically see, is that they cut his throat, throw him in a swamp, leave him to die, but then he still survives after all of that and is still ticking. And then even after he gets burned to death later on in the film, he then is still alive, just hanging out in this mansion, in this old mansion, and just feeding off of scraps. And then that sets things up really well for a sequel that sadly never happened. But he feeds on Christian Slater's character and the reporter, and he's alive again. And now he's got this whole new world to play with, the contemporary modern world. And yeah, Lestat is definitely the star of the show. But I think Louis and Claudia, the dynamic between those two is still strong enough to make the film still very engaging when it comes to sequences with those two or with them and Lestat. But I do admit it isn't as strong when Lestat is taken out of the picture. Once you just start focusing on Louis and Claudia by themselves, and they're trying to find out where other vampires are and might be, and that ultimately leads them to discovering this clan of vampires. in Paris, where the head of these vampires is Armand, who has this infatuation and affection for Louis, in a similar way as Lestat, but in a less manipulative sort of way. He actually genuinely cares for him. He doesn't want to use him like Lestat used uh, Louis. And I like the connection that Armand and Louis have. I think the script did a good job building that. But then there's this other stuff with this other vampire who works for Armand, or who I think he's potentially above Armand. Santiago, he's the one that when he first appears, it's just too out there for me. Like the film had a pretty consistent tone when it comes to the script, and then all of a sudden it's like you're watching a silent movie, like some guy trying to act like he's Charlie Chaplin or something. It's just the kind of thing that just didn't kind of work. And then with Santiago later on, I mean, I like the idea of this stage play where they play vampires, and the whole plot is about them feeding on people, but then it's actually really happening for real. But these rich socialites in Paris, like, they don't know better. They just think it's all a show. I actually don't mind that. I think that's actually a pretty clever idea, but that's not enough to really consistently engage you when it comes to the characters or what's going on with this sequence. But it definitely picks up once Santiago finds out the truth about what happened to Lestat, and then decides to take matters into his own hands and enact some vampire justice on Louis and Claudia. And even prior to that, there's a bit of intrigue where Claudia has this moment with Louis where she asks him for one last favor before she goes, because she's ready to separate from him, and she wants to go on her own, and she wants him to create essentially a mother for her. And there's this woman who's willing to do it, and willing to change, and willing to be a vampire. And you have this conflict with Louis where he's like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this to another person. But then Claudia gets him to do it. And that's what leads to the sequence that has forever been burned in my brain ever since I saw it when I was a teenager, when Santiago decides to get revenge for Lestat and takes Louis and buries him. That doesn't necessarily bury him alive. He stones him in a wall. So he sticks him in a wall, puts him in a coffin, and then puts stones around it, and essentially bricks him inside a wall. And then he takes Claudia and her new mother, her new vampire mother, and traps them in this well. And there's an open top on it. There's an opening on top of it. It's not covered. So when the sun rises, they get exposed to the full sunlight. And it's a very tragic and just really darkly uh beautiful scene in some ways, despite the fact that it's so sad, where they slowly burn to death and then turn into ash. And honestly, the image of them embracing each other, huddling, as they're being killed by sunlight, is something that, like I said, it just really just burned in my memory for whatever reason. And when I watched that scene again, like, it still really hit me pretty hard. I think it's because of the fact that a lot of the times when you see these sequences where vampires get destroyed by sunlight, it's one of those heroic moments. It's one of those grand, like, yeah, we got him, like in Fright Night, when they break the windows and Jerry gets burned by sunlight and explodes. Like that's an awesome moment. You're like, yes, their reign of terror is ended. But the way that the vampires are written in this film, they didn't really feel that way. You started to sympathize and relate to and genuinely like these characters. Even though I didn't know a whole lot about the mother character, I still wanted to see what things might have been like with her taking care of Claudia. But that doesn't happen because they are killed by sunlight. It really did create a very different view of vampires and sunlight than any other vampire film or story that I can think of. It actually made it into something that was tragic. And it actually kind of choked me up when Louis went back to the well after he was rescued by Armand, and he finds the essentially the corpses of Claudia and the vampire mother, and he touches their ash bodies, and then it just disintegrates and just floats away. And yeah, it was just so sad. Such a sad way for these characters to die. Um, and then after that, you get a really crowd pleasing sequence where Louis just goes out and kicks some serious ass. He burns down the vampire's den. He cuts Santiago in half with a scythe, and it's all done practically. I think he even like decapitated one of the other vampires. It's a great sequence. It's a real crowd pleaser. And then after that, that's kind of in a lot of ways the climax of the film, because then it starts to shift its focus more on the interviewer in San Francisco who's interviewing Louis in what was modern time when this film was released. And it does a little bit where it cycles through the years and fast forward, where Louis is living through the 60s or the 70s or a little bit before that, all the way up to the 90s. There's a really nice and genuinely cool scene that I didn't see coming, where Louis goes to a movie theater and it's playing Superman the movie. So, and he's talking about how films were the first time that he was able to see the sun. He was able to see the sunrise. Uh, and it actually shows the shot of Christopher Reeve flying in front of Earth with the sun in the background. I thought that was just a great, unexpected, fun little tribute to Christopher Reeve, who I know at this time was still technically, yeah, he was still alive, but I think this is around the time of his accident or a little bit before it. Um, but it was just in retrospect, like in hindsight, it makes for a really fun little, nice little tribute to Chris. And the interviewer, he ultimately wants the vampire curse because, of course, he does. Louis doesn't want to do it, gets pissed off, then storms off in a huff. He then finds Lestat again because he smells an old death that other people can't sense, and finds Lestat, and they have a moment with one another. And Lestat then somehow finds a way to get enough strength to hide in the back of the reporter's convertible, bites him on the neck, and now he's back. And that's kind of the end of the movie. And normally I don't go through the script when I talk about the story like this, but I love this film, so I felt like I really needed to give it uh, all the gusto that I possibly could. So yeah, I really think this script is absolutely um, terrific. It's just a great screenplay, and the cast is just absolutely top notch. Like it's a really great cast. Um, you've got Tom Cruise as Lestat, and honestly, one of my personal favorite roles of his. I just thought he embraced this role fully into the hilt, and it was a joy to watch. Brad Pitt, I thought he was good in this. I thought he actually delivered a good performance, even though this is one of his earlier roles. So he's still trying to kind of figure things out as an actor, but I still think he did a good job. I know that he didn't like shooting this film because it was a nightmare because he was like suspended upside down a lot to have the blood go to his head so it could create this certain look that they were looking for the vampire. And that's unfortunate, but it didn't really come across in his performance. I think he still gave it his all, and I think there were a lot of scenes between him and Tom Cruise where he stood toe to toe with them. I didn't think that Brad Pitt was just swallowed whole by Tom Cruise in the sequences between the two. I felt Brad Pitt definitely held his own when it comes to the scenes between him and Antonio Banderas. I actually think the scenes between those two were so good that I wanted to see more of that dynamic, but I understand why you didn't get a lot of that. Stephen Ray, he's one of the weakest performances as Santiago. Just a little too over the top, just a little too hammy. Didn't really fit with the tone of what they're trying to go for. I know Lestat was over the top at times, but that just felt like it fit more with Santiago. It felt a little too artificial. Antonio Banderas, I thought he did a really good job as Armand. He had a certain sense of sophistication to him as well compared to Lestat, but it was different enough that it didn't feel like they were kind of the same character. I also like the fact that Armand, he was more open to a lot of things than Lestat was, and he was more flexible, and he wanted to actually teach Louis the ways of the vampire the right way. Um, Christian Slater is the reporter Daniel Malloy. He wasn't in the film a lot, but he definitely made an impression. I thought he really did a nice job playing this genuinely intrigued, just captivated reporter who can't believe what he's hearing when it comes to this interview with the vampire. And definitely one of the roles in his career that I would say is right up there with some of his best work. But I would say, other than Tom Cruise, who is the showstopper, Kirsten Dunst is the other performer in this cast that really left the largest mark, because for a young child actor, this was an incredibly challenging and difficult role to not only play, the typical young girl who becomes a vampire and then is just has this bloodlust and has all this power and influence and so on and is loving it and loving life, being doted on and being treated like a princess, but also the adult woman in a little girl's body, to just really showcase that aspect of that character in a way that came across as genuine. And I thought she nailed it. It was a really, really great performance, and I would say honestly it's probably her best acting role, which is kind of sad since she went on to have a lot of other acting roles as an adult. But I really do feel that way. I think this is her best performance as an actress, is as Claudia when she was a kid in this movie. There are a few other actors and actresses. Thandie Newton has an uncredited role in one scene, but really that's the main cast, and they all work together well. And it really definitely was a film that had a really top flight, top notch cast. Um, And forgive me, folks, if I'm repeating things throughout this review. There's only so many words you can come up with and use when it comes to uh, something being of high quality. And speaking of high quality stuff, I gotta mention the cinematography by Philippe Rousselot. It's just a really great looking film when it comes to the cinematography. There's some just lavish, luscious, just breathtaking shots in this movie. It features some excellent editing by Mick Audsley and Joke Van Wyk as well, and a good score by Elliot Goldenthal, as well as some nice little bits of other songs. Like there's a cover of "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones, which I don't think is as good as the actual song, but it still works. Still works in the film. Oh, and I did want to briefly mention the makeup effects by Stan Winston. I know that this isn't something that was like really crazy in terms of prosthetics and whatever, but I still really felt that the effects that you did have in the film were still really good. I thought that they were still really spectacular in their own way. There's a certain ethereal quality to the vampire looks here with the veins and the pale skin and the piercing blue eyes and a lot of that stuff that I felt really did provide a very striking look for these vampires. And definitely the highlight is when you see Lestat in these varying different degrees of decomposition or decay, and also the sequence when Claudia and her vampire mother are disintegrated by the sunlight. And of course, the big grand finale with Santiago and his vampire coven getting absolutely wrecked by Louis. But there's a lot of subtle stuff here that I thought was still really good, and it was really cool to see Stan Winston's take on a vampire makeup. And I thought for like 122 minutes, it honestly went by pretty quickly for me. I did feel like there was some moments when the Lestat was out of the picture where it wasn't as strong or wasn't as engaging. But overall, I still felt that it was engaging enough that it kept my interest. There wasn't really any moment where I was bored by it. So, yeah, I really don't know what else to say about Interview with the Vampire except highly recommend this one if you haven't seen it yet for whatever reason. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.